Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Brent. I am the Membership and Meetings Coordinator with UTC, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled The Network Effect of Grid Communications, and today's webinar is hosted by Anterix. Today's webinar will be a discussion amongst our panelists, and just wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our moderator for today's session. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand for all attendees. So if you do need to leave early or would like to rewatch the content, you will be able to do so after today's webinar. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit those questions via the questions section on your GoToWebinar control panel. And we will make sure that those questions get answered in the order that they are received. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's session. He goes by the name of Kevin Malloy. He is the VP of Customer Solutions and Strategic Development at Anterix. Kevin, I'll hand it off to you to introduce the rest of the panel.
Great, and thank you, Christopher. Welcome to the Network Effect of Grid Communications webinar, and thanks to the UTC for hosting us today. I am Kevin Malloy, as Chris said, Vice President of Customer Solutions and Strategic Development for Anterix. My guests today are Guidehouse Analyst Richelle Elberg, Southern Link's Engineering Director Alan McIntyre, and my colleague Chris Guttman-McCabe, who was recently named Chief Regulatory and Communications Officer for Anterix. As we're all aware, there's a growing momentum in the utility sector for private LTE networks as a preferred communication platform for connected digital intelligent grid. Today, our discussion will be about the benefits of private LTE networks and how utilities, by embracing a more collective and standardized approach, can maximize the value of a more interoperable and standards-based communications platform and could realize the significant benefits of a collective network effect. At Anterix, we refer to this as the Grid Communications Network Effect, and Richelle Elberg will share her vision of this in her recently published white paper entitled Private LTE Networks Position Utilities for Industry Transformation. Today's format is going to be in the form of a question and answer roundtable, and we invite our audience to participate by entering something in the chat, a question in the chat section, and as we go through the process, Christopher will help us navigate those. If you have any questions that we can't get to, we'll do those as we go, so we'll be a little more interactive, and we'd like to respond to those at each of our questions. So today, I'll start with Richelle. Good morning, Richelle, and just give us a little bit about yourself and help us set the stage from a researcher's perspective for why private LTE networks are getting so much interest from the utility sector and what benefits you believe they can offer us.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and good morning, everyone. So a little bit about myself. I've been a technology or communications industry analyst for pushing 30 years now. I started following the wireless industry back in the mid-90s when there were hundreds, if not thousands, of cellular carriers around the country. And I followed both wired and wireless telecom throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. I came to what was then known as Pike Research back in 2012 and joined full-time with Navigant Research. We've gone through a few name changes in 2013. And so I've been researching and analyzing how communications networks are deployed and utilized by utilities since that time, about 8 years now. I first wrote about the utilities' need to embrace a more robust, 4G wireless or fiber type network back about 5 years ago. We wrote a white paper at that time called the Energy Superhighway. And in it, I didn't specify private LTE specifically because at the time there really weren't a lot of spectrum options available to utilities. So that's one thing that has changed since that time frame. But in general, I think utilities understand pretty well all the drivers for their need for a more robust and more ubiquitous connectivity throughout their territories. The utility industry is facing business model transformation. There are changing load profiles. You have solar and EVs proliferating in some places quite rapidly, less so in others. This year we saw how the COVID pandemic impacted the location of that load. So instead of having everyone commute to the city, you now see a higher load profile in the suburbs all day long. We have more frequent and more violent storms and fire events. And so all of these dynamics create a need for greater visibility and in some cases control throughout the distribution grid. In the past, there really hasn't been a great deal of visibility throughout that part of the grid, but that's where something like 90% of outages occur. So 4G private LTE or public LTE provides the low latency required for that control side of the equation. It has the security that utilities require, and it provides a path to 5G. So I think these are all reasons why utilities really should consider private LTE today. And we'll get more into it, but the notion of a network effect, you know, if the industry thinks about its competitive profile and how that's changing going forward, that type of coordination could, in the end, be very beneficial to utilities. But we'll get into all of that, I think, throughout the conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Richelle. Ellen, I'm going to ask you to give us a little bit about yourself. Also, a little follow-up from utility perspective.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I've been with Southern Company and Southern Link going on, I guess, 26 years now, and so I'm a little bit unusual from the careers of today. I've been at Southern Link the whole time. A lot of folks in the utility industry move between, you know, transmission, distribution, generation, and different business units throughout their career. I've been in the same place, so I jokingly say I've had a traditional career for somebody from the 1950s, but anyway, so I've been in this space a long time. I started with Southern Company and Southern Link when we were first building out the Iden network. And I think it gives a little bit of historical perspective looking at Iden and where we kind of came from and where we are today. With Iden, we were trying to solve a problem. Southern Company had 4 electric utilities. There were 6 different LMR systems between those 4 electric utilities at that point in time. And so Iden really was the network of networks from an LMR perspective at the time. And we saw great efficiency. Before, when Georgia Power went to help Mississippi Power after a hurricane, they had to bring their LMR system with them and set it up. Once we built the Iden network, they just had to have a handset and they could roll anywhere in the footprint and talk. And so, you know, simple things in life, it was a big deal. And so if we go back to 2010, we started a strategy project looking all the way out into the future to 2020. And part of that strategy, we knew that Iden would likely be end of life by 2020. And so it was really a question of what do we do now? And at that point, we had packet data on Iden as well. And so really from a distribution SCADA perspective, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and Gulf Power were all using Iden for their distribution SCADA technology. And so we wanted something that could expand upon that. We certainly saw that data needs were growing. And Alabama Power had a 900 megahertz SCADA network that really preceded the Iden network by about a couple of years. So same vintage of technology. And at that point in time too, cybersecurity was becoming much more critical. And trying to do cybersecurity solutions to both Iden and that old SCADA network were growingly complicated. And so after a couple of years of investigation and putting a business case together, we got a private LT network approved. And so, and really the foundational elements of that were, Richelle hit on reliability. You know, we really truly believe we built a critical network, a utility grade network. Prioritization of traffic. You know, it's not as, you know, there's a lot of talk about prioritization, but you know, SCADA may need higher priority than another application. So it's really down to an application layer for us, of course, prioritization. Coverage, I mean, we have a large footprint with, pretty much throughout the state of Alabama, Georgia, parts of Mississippi, a lot of rural areas. So, having coverage where you need it was a big deal. And then ultimately resiliency was a big piece too. And that touches the cyber piece, but as well, we have a lot of tornadoes, hurricanes. So being able to recover the network and how you build it and design it kind of goes into that. But we've been working at building the network for about 7 years now. I like to say we're on the home stretch. We've just got a little bit left to finish up, but I would say that the network has really exceeded expectations. When we put the business case together originally, for the number of devices we would have this year, we're more than double that right now. So pretty big success there. And I think the adoption, people, you always have folks that doubt the reliability or am I going to have coverage? Those questions now get asked. So we've kind of crested the hill on those sort of things. So people feel confident with the network. And so I think, what we said we were going to do and what we did matched up. And so that's always a good thing. And so, I think hopefully we've kind of created a model that other utilities can really replicate as far as going down the private LTE path.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Alan. One of the things I took from your conversation literally was the early days of Southern Company and the disparate systems you had, the number of different LMR systems. So not unusual in the business, fortunately, but the good thing is there's somebody to look at in Southern what they did with that. Really marry it up to one basic platform of private LTE. With that, thank you. Chris, I'm going to jump to you and just give us a quick background about yourself and tell us about how you see private LTE benefiting utilities, especially with the 900 megahertz spectrum.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin and Alan and Richelle. Excited to be on the panel with you. I joined full-time Anterix about 2.5 months ago, but I've been working with the team for almost 6 years since the beginning of the FCC process to repurpose the 900 megahertz spectrum. And prior to that, I had a run as a private consultant working with the technology and telecom space. And before that, I spent 13 years at CTIA. So I think similar to Alan and Richelle, I've been in the same sector for about 30 years, although Alan, not at the same exact organization, but certainly working on the same suite of issues. And to be honest, Kevin, what excited me about Anterix was the intersection of wireless and broadband with an ecosystem or a universe, the utility ecosystem, that really could benefit from the evolution of broadband. I think, and obviously we're going to get into some more detail, but if I were to choose one word that would embody the benefits of private LTE and in Anterix's case 900 megahertz private LTE and the utility sector, I would say control. Richelle mentioned it, Alan mentioned it. All of the things that would flow to the utilities from control. And Alan, I had a list and I was checking them off as you said them, sort of as you were stealing my thoughts in advance, the problem of going third. But you think resiliency and redundancy and priority, not just the prioritization as compared to other users of the network, but as Alan mentioned, being able to get down to a packet level and to an application level when you're prioritizing. Really the ability to choose your own, backup power and backup power levels and the site locations and the ability to sort of drive your own upgrades on your own timing. I mean, it all really does come back to control. And so I see that as really the macro level benefit of going with private LTE. Again, the thing that excited me, I go back to my CTIA days and I witnessed the evolution of 2 to 3G in the consumer space. And remember, we commissioned a paper, not unlike the work that Richelle did for us in trying to identify and sort of illustrate what would happen when we move from 2 to 3G. And we couldn't have been more wrong in our predictions because of how unaware and unprepared we were for the evolution that came with it. I know, Alan, you're experiencing it, and I've heard some of you and some of your executives talk about, you know, the benefits that continue to flow. But I look at that sort of 2 to 3G evolution and the doors that were open to the consumer market and try to export that to the utility ecosystem. And I just get excited. You know, you think artificial intelligence and machine learning, cloud and edge computing, you know, the ability to capture, aggregate, analyze, and then act upon big pools of data. You know, that's a future that really, to be quite frank, the only entity that has any vision into that at the moment is Alan and the team at Southern Link and Southern. So for me, that's the intersection of private LTE, and we're excited because we look at Anterix as being really much more than just a spectrum company, and so we're excited to help harness that evolution and that transformation.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, and a lot of the utilities that are listening in today have felt the pain of the unplanned upgrades that they've had to go through with 2G, 3G, and trying to get the money and try to capitalize that. And it hasn't been easy, I know from my own experience. With that, I'm going to go back to Richelle and ask you a question around your private LTE network position utilities for industry transformation white paper. And can you give us a brief summary about your vision for a collective effort in terms of private LTE networks? Richelle, you might be on mute.
There we go. So I first started working with Anterix to write this paper last spring. And the first thing we did was interview a dozen or so people in the business like Alan, people at utilities and also at some associations to get their reaction. And basically what we did was we built a graphic, and you can see this if you go to the Anterix website and download the white paper. But we built a graphic with what we called value pillars. And in these value pillars, we attempted to define what different value enhancements might come should a network effect develop between utilities with coordinated private LTE networks. So the obvious benefit is roaming. And if you follow the wireless industry as long as I have, you would recall that back in '98, when AT&T first announced that it would no longer charge roaming, this was huge news in the industry. It was paradigm changing. And I think that utilities today, other than the example that was already given, and that is traveling between territories for assistance during a disaster, you know, that's a roaming application that would be an immediate benefit to those utilities with compatible LTE networks. But so back to my graphic, we had these value pillars we developed. Some of them are what we called immediate term, or less than 5 years, where the benefit might be seen. And then some of them are more like 10 or 15 years out. And it's all built around this notion of industry transformation. So some of the benefits that we identified, and what we did was we identified these benefits, and then we ran them by the folks we interviewed last spring. Then we did a 100-person survey online as well, targeting utility executives involved with IT and communications. So we got a really nice, broad, quantitative and qualitative view of our thesis on these value pillars. And so I'll just name a couple of the applications. You know, seamless integration of shared services. So today, lots of utilities are either building or buying analytics solutions. Those analytics solutions may have to do with grid operations, but they may have to do with customer experience or customer outreach. And if you think about a utility territory, you might have a large IOU with a whole lot of municipal utilities islanded within that IOU. And wouldn't they perhaps all benefit from sharing the costs of either developing an analytics solution or procuring one from a vendor? So that's just one idea. Some of the other ideas, we talked about providing broadband services or networking services to other critical utilities like water and gas utilities. They also need to innovate and upgrade and get to the industry 4.0 level in terms of their technological sophistication, but they're actually lagging most electric utilities. Regional visibility and coordination. Another thought that we had in this research was that the idea that, you know, solar and or EV penetration may be skyrocketing someplace like San Diego, but maybe years away from somewhere else in the Midwest. But in those regions like, say, Southern California, where you have pockets of what's becoming very high penetration, you may need load balancing at a more regional level than the ISOs can provide at the transmission level. So distribution level load balancing. Best in class cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, Alan mentioned it, it's something that is a growing danger. The more of this IT and comms that gets deployed for critical infrastructure, the greater the surface attack area for cyber risk. But at the same time, you know, the value outweighs the threat. So what utilities need is best in class cybersecurity. And one way to do that is to make sure that all of the smaller utilities are as well protected as the larger utilities that may have, you know, a dedicated team focused on cybersecurity day in, day out. Smaller utilities don't always have that personnel and expertise. So I'll stop there, but those are just a few of the value pillars we identified in creating this research and this paper, and each of the value pillars is talked about in more detail in the paper.
Very good. Thank you, Richelle. Alan, what's your response to Richelle's vision and looking at it from the utilities perspective?
Yeah, it actually aligns pretty well with Southern Link's business model. You know, so we built a private LT network, and then, you know, like we did with Iden, we made the decision to sell commercial services on the network. And so our model really is everything we develop internal for Southern Company's needs, we then try to go offer those same services to others. And so, you know, we're not talking consumers, we're talking more government business customers. And a lot of times that takes the form of those EMCs that are in our footprint. I mean, yeah, our coverage area looks like the whole state of Georgia, you know, or Alabama or Mississippi, but when you drill down, there's a lot of EMCs and munis and co-ops that also serve some of those areas. And so, and we've started to do that. So some of the, we've got a sensor that we've worked with Alabama Power on. And so now we're offering that, and one of the EMCs is using that really as their SCADA network. And so we're trying to take everything we do here internally and then take it externally. And to Richelle's point, I mean, you know, we have a security operations center. You know, we have that scale within Southern Company that an EMC really might not have. And so we can kind of take those headaches and burdens off. And two, we can offer the full range of services, you know, integrating mission critical push to talk, VoLTE, broadband data, having all those to offer. It's you know, it's a complex undertaking. It's yeah, it's not for the faint of heart some days. So we're able to offer all that and really provide something that you know, is pretty compelling when you talk about again, back to the reliability, resiliency, those aspects. But at the end of the day, it's really a win-win both ways, because it reduces our operational cost having revenue coming in and provides them with something that really doesn't, you know, necessarily exist in the marketplace in some, especially in some very rural areas.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. I think two keys. One is I'm an acronym guy. So EMCs is Electric Member Co-op, right? So, but the other is the interoperability that they all have with Southern Link, or if they have the ability to access your network. It's a much more robust, it's a higher maintenance function that you perform than, let's say, a public carrier, and it's got the 5 nines, so to speak, resiliency built into it. So I'd much prefer to be getting my cell service from Southern Link than I do from the current vendor I have. So with that, Chris, how do you respond to Richelle's vision as a technology vendor?
Yeah, so first, Kevin, I'm going to respond to Alan's response to Richelle's vision, and this is sort of what I like about batting cleanup in this case is, I think I envision or visualize what Alan and Southern Link are doing for Southern as the network effect, but on a geographically defined basis, right? And he just defined how the work that they're doing sort of takes away some of the pain points for others in that geography. And so I look at what Richelle wrote for us as taking that concept and applying it at the macro level instead of at the micro level. I am an economist by education and trade for about a half dozen years, so I do like to geek out at times on these concepts, and the network effect concept is something that I had investigated often when I was in my early part of my career, and I keep going back when folks ask me about Richelle's paper, and again, I do want to reference it is on our website. I think it's a great, very really defined read. I think Richelle ended up being about 9 pages total or something like that. So it's easy to get through. But to me, whenever anyone asks me to summarize it, I go right to the 3rd paragraph. And so I'm going to turn my head and read it. I'm going to do what you're not supposed to do on any of these video sessions, and I'm going to look away from the camera. But this is the 3rd paragraph. The industry can maximize the value of these new opportunities by banding together to embrace the concept of compatible private LTE networks. Guidehouse Insights believes there is a potential for a collective network effect, and that's defined as enhanced incremental value creation for each network participant, to develop across the United States as more electric utilities build out compatible, interoperable private LTE networks. So to me, that is an ecosystem, right? That is the creation, development, launch, and embracing of an ecosystem, and I like that concept. We'll get into what that means and scale, scope, and things like that. But as an employee of Anterix, we certainly look at the creation of the ecosystem. Sort of what comes next once this broadband capability is available, and we're working with really a broad range. More than 40 utilities are in our pipeline, including a couple that we've worked with, like Ameren, for years, and they have really investigated. Alan, you talked about sunsetting or ultimately onboarding, 5 LMR systems. We've had one utility say that they have 20 separate operational narrowband LMR systems that they ultimately are going to onboard to private LTE at 900 megahertz. So that's how I look at it. It's really the word again would be ecosystem.
Great, Chris. Thank you very much. Chris, I'm going to come right back to you, and I'm going to ask you this question. What do you see as the broader range of benefits this type of standardized collective effort would offer utilities and their customers?
Yeah, the simplest is to use the word scale and scope, right? So you have buying, scale, and scope, but then you have innovation, to be honest, scale and scope. You have the creation of an application ecosystem and a device ecosystem and a services ecosystem. You have, the incentive, a strong incentive to innovate. You ultimately start to bring in vendors and others who might not be traditionally part of the utility ecosystem. Think cloud providers, and companies like Intel and Cisco and Sun and companies like that. You obviously have the mutual aid that Alan referenced and Richelle referenced, those benefits, but research and development, the sharing of knowledge. I mean, I've always looked at it's interesting. The network effect, the first time I looked at it was investigating cancer research. And when you look at cancer research, the network effect of more people investigating certain types of cancer, there was an actual benefit for learning not only what worked, but learning what didn't. And so that the follow-on entities didn't have to repeat the mistakes. And so for me, it's the advanced learning that comes with the network effect. And it's sort of those range of benefits that you can imagine. And then, to be quite frank, it's the ones you can't as well when you do insert artificial intelligence and machine learning and cloud and edge computing. So those are the ranges, or that is the range, I guess, of potential benefits. But I also think some of it is unknown at the moment. And we will learn it as more really join and move into private LTE at 900 megahertz.
Great, thank you, Chris. It's kind of like getting a new iPhone when they first came out, right? There were 10
Right.
apps. Now there's millions, so it's a whole
Well,
different.
And that was part of the mistake we made, or how wrong we were. We talked about there being 1,000 applications within a 12 to 18 month period, and there were millions within that 12 to 18 month period, right? And so that goes back to scale, but it's it's doors that will open that will drive innovation, that some of which we can't imagine at the moment.
Thank you. Richelle?
Kevin, if I may, yeah. Well, I just wanted to point out in our value pillar diagram, the final pillar is a gleam in a garage entrepreneur's eye. And we left that there because of what Chris was just saying. You can't imagine today all of the possible applications that will emerge in 5, 10, 15 years, particularly if this network is built and it's compatible across territories. Another pillar we talk about is cross-territory transactive energy. And I know transactive energy still seems kind of far away to many, but some of the applications that Ameren and NYPA are exploring with the Anterix spectrum is transactive energy. So don't rule anything out is the point I would make there.
Excellent. Alan?
Yeah, I think several things have been touched on. I'll just maybe drill down a little bit more. I mean, roaming certainly, off the top. I think one thing we've kind of offered and are interested in. I mean, it's a concept is core hosting. So does every utility need to build a core network? I mean, there's different architectures as far as putting gateways closer to the edge, but what if utilities just had regional cores? It'd be simpler to manage. Then it'd take out some costs for other utilities of building out their network. So that's a concept. I go back to copying somebody's what the greatest form of flattery. We're members of a wireless group, Competitive Carriers Association, which is really for smaller regional carriers. One thing they've done a good job of, they have a roaming hub. They also have a device hub. And so one thing, it's back to Chris's point on scope and scale. The device hub, by having the smaller guys kind of come together, you have higher buying power. That's good. And I think we could leverage that on a consumer basis. But then let's take it the next step into utility-centric devices. One thing we've been working on for probably going on 2 years maybe now is having an electric meter with LTE under the glass. We actually have probably about a dozen, maybe more than that now. They're putting them out every day on the network. They're billing correctly, so fingers crossed everything's working. But I think getting others in the tent with us on those kind of development efforts would be great, because there's multiple chipset options in LTE, and so you kind of want meters that kind of have run the gamut, and it's kind of an all arrows in the quiver kind of strategy. So having scope and scale helps those kind of discussions. So that would be big. The other piece there, once you get through the development cycle, there's also the testing and certification. So right now we test every device that goes on our network and certify it. And so it wouldn't make sense for us to certify a device, and if Ameren had a private LTE network, for them to certify it, and utility XYZ to do the same thing. We could band together and really handle that in a much more efficient manner than everybody off on their own doing the same thing multiple times. So I think working with FCC, as the 6 gigahertz proceedings kind of shown, that I think if we band together, we can have a pretty strong voice. I would say 3GPP standards. We've participated in 3GPP. 3GPP, especially kind of moving into 5G, is getting more into verticals. So the railroads have had a voice, and there's standards around railroads. There's a ultra reliable low latency standard. Why shouldn't utilities have some of the requirements into that body so that they could be worked on? I think we could hit on like device management, SIM cards kind of come to mind. But the one that I'll close with is really, and it's been touched on, is kind of tools. We've developed tools to monitor the network that tie back into our affiliates to help them monitor their devices in the field. And then you get into the data analytics piece. And I think that's, to me, that's really the future of network monitoring, is taking all that data and finding the problem before it happens. And so I think, again, bigger pool of folks with common devices. The commercial guys have a lot of mobility on their networks. We're talking about networks that may not have much mobility. If you're talking electric meters, SCADA devices, there's a lot of fixed devices that aren't moving. So it's a little bit different model, right? And so those data analytics could be different at that point. So I think that's, to me, that's kind of the future horizon, where there could be a lot of synergies around utilities kind of coming together. So that's a few that just off the top of my head.
Excellent, thank you. Kind of reminds me of the commercial where you have Watson is in the elevator and he's telling you that tomorrow the elevator is going to have a maintenance problem.
That's right.
The mechanic showing up early. And that's the general idea of what you're saying, Alan, is be able to predict that before it happens. These are big for things like wildfires, right? Be able to tell the temperature of a conductor or a cutout or something that's going to fail imminently. Could be a day or a week later, but you can get out there earlier rather than later to work on that. So thank you. So this is the last question I have for y'all. And what I'd like to really do is kind of see how we can break this up into 3 really separate and distinct responses. And this is the why. Why should utilities participate in a collective effort such as this? And Alan, I'll come right back to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I think Richelle touched on, I mean, the utility industry is changing and undergoing quite a bit of change right now. And so I think given that evolution of the grid, connectivity is truly a key component. And we did a refresh of our strategy last year. In connectivity, we basically, came to the conclusion connectivity is part of grid modernization. You can't have one without the other. And so I think, utilities, it's playing a long game. You want to plan out how you're going to meet those connectivity needs in the future. And so you got to start now so that you hit it by the time the demand, you're always ahead of the demand. We refreshed ours and talked about the growth. I mean, we're expecting in the next decade, 8 to 10x growth. And so it's how do you meet that need? And so I think, coming together, there's certainly benefits for utilities, sharing best practices. I mean, we're all in the same boat with the same struggles. The great thing about the utility industry is we don't really compete, especially around communication. So, talking about these kind of things, we can actively share and make each other better. And I think it's really gotten outside the box too. I mean, we've talked about Southern Link's footprint's pretty limited in the Southeast. Southern Company, since then is, we have Southern Power, which is a wholesale energy provider, operates, I think, in 11 states outside our footprint. We have Nicor Gas in Illinois, Virginia, natural gas in southeastern Virginia. So it's beyond just serving our electric utilities now in the Southeast. It's how do we meet the wireless needs in a greater geography? And so that's where I think partnerships could form. And, why would we go build a private LTE when, the IOU in one of those areas is building one too? Why don't we partner, right? And so I think there's, the statement Chris read, I mean, that's kind of an aspirational goal for me. I mean, where we do have this, kind of nationwide utility LTE network. I think, that'd be a fantastic day.
Excellent. Chris?
Yeah, Alan, I think it would be a fantastic day as well, and I'm excited to see it. I'm going to take. I mean, obviously, the why is centered on the fact that and Richelle mentioned this, and Alan mentioned this. The business model for utilities is changing. The reality that they're facing is changing. Commitments to decarbonization, the distributed energy environment is changing. The reliance on renewables, the influx and growing use of electric vehicles, the reality of storms. I mean, I think Richelle ticked them off all pretty perfectly. But I'm actually going to take a step back, Kevin, and I'm going to say why. And UTC has been at the center of trying to get spectrum for the utility ecosystem for a long time. It's now available, right? So the FCC at 900 megahertz made broadband available, and Anterix, as the overwhelming majority spectrum holder, is trying to focus on the utility sector. There's a single license in each county. We want to work with the utilities. That is evidenced in the 40 utilities with whom we're working, including Alan and the team at Southern and Ameren and a host of others. But the time is now, right? And so from my perspective, it's really trying to move forward in a way that captures this opportunity for the utility sector. We know there's a need there. I think 5 years ago, but for Southern Link's work, it was hard to find utilities focusing on broadband, and now it's universally accepted. And so from my perspective, we need to move forward. Anterix is working to clear the band. The FCC obviously identified two different types of incumbents. The ones that have smaller traditional spectrum position, and those that are complex systems, and we're working to establish creative relationships, particularly creative with those complex systems, because in order to move to broadband, we need their buy-in. But we as a company have reached out to almost the entirety of the incumbent ecosystem, just to really act on this goal to get the utility sector to have a broadband opportunity. So that to me is the why. I mean, I think we've gone through all of the benefits that flow, but for me, it begins with the opportunity that exists right now.
Thank you very much. And Richelle, what do you think? In referencing your paper, try to come up with that real keyword on why you think the utility should actually participate.
I'm actually going to reference another white paper I wrote a couple years ago, and it's called From Smart Grid to Neural Grid. And the word is survival. So if you go online and find that old white paper of mine, I reference what happened to landline telcos. And the ironic thing is that they were all given wireless licenses in late 80s, early 90s, I think. And over the course of the next 15 years or so, they all sold. So now we have Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. But what happened to those telcos that sold? Look at CenturyLink. Look at the landline business of Verizon, which they've tried to sell off. The point is, it's a legacy monopoly business, and I'm not a doomsdayer. This isn't happening tomorrow. But the monopoly utility of the old is gone, and if you don't modernize, you are not going to be able to keep up with the Teslas of the world. Big corporations like Walmart are building solar on top of every store, and on and on and on. The energy storage technology has come down in price. It's getting better all the time. Solar has come down dramatically in price. So what is left for the utility? If they don't modernize, if they don't embrace these new trends, all you have to do is look at the stock market to see how enthusiastic investors are about EVs and solar, but they're not so enthusiastic about utilities. So the business model has to change, and in order for it to transform, it has to be supported by robust technology and a robust network. Private LTE is the obvious choice, is a prerequisite to, in my opinion, to long-term survival of the traditional utility.
That's a great motivator. I think, yeah. So I do have one more question, and it's how do you see the collective action taking shape? Is there anything that you feel the industry should be doing specifically to help this grid communications network effect happen? I'll go to Alan.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think definitely there's action that's needed. I think there's several avenues for that. Honestly, it's kind of been a struggle for the industry, right? And we've been talking to utilities in Europe that are struggling with private LTE as well. I think it's a universal kind of struggle, but I think at some point we having the organizational structure, like I talked about with CCA, where you can kind of form the device hub, the roaming hub, and you have a launching pad for those. That's big. I think UBBA is the Utility Broadband Alliance, certainly plays a role there. It's brought a lot of utilities together to talk about private LTE, which was great. UTC's got a role to play. I think, and I'll just put in a plug for Brett. He's trying to organize utilities to work with DoD on spectrum sharing, and so it always seems like it's an uphill battle a little bit to get everybody kind of over the hump and engaged. And so I think it's really got to be a call to action for utilities at this point, because I do agree. I mean, if they don't take action soon, it's going to get harder. And your solutions, over time will get more limited. So, this is the time for sure.
Thank you, Alan. I totally agree with you. And I think the other driver is the adoption of all of the disparate green energy systems that are being deployed, whether it be a rooftop solar or a wind farm. These are things that are coming into the grid at different levels, not just transmission, they're coming into distribution. So now we've got things like DSOs, distribution system operators, that are starting to pop up within the utilities for regions, right? So it's more of a regional look or a view. Chris, your comment?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Again, I think I'll echo what Alan said. I mean, I guess I would start with the notion that this is happening at a micro level. We have 8 experimental licenses at 900 megahertz. But I do think there needs to be, sort of broader, more industry-wide movement. Kevin referenced UBBA, UBBA, and UTC. We've reached out to Gridwise and EEI and others. But I think, to be honest, I think part of it is going to be we're going to have to lay this at the feet of Alan and the team at Southern and Ameren and NIPA and some of the others that are the early movers to help really drive the industry, because it'll be in their benefit and in the industry's benefit. But I do see it happening, and I see it could simply be, as Alan referenced, the industry coming together for 6 gigahertz, or something I'm working on is industry legislation, infrastructure legislation that will, Congress will connect grid modernization, grid evolution with grid communications needs, right? And so you can't have a modern grid without a modern communications component. And so, hopefully we'll get broader industry embracing of infrastructure legislation. But I do think it's going to happen. I think that there are platforms, as Alan referenced, like UBBA and UTC and others. And I think we will have, some leadership from some of the early movers in the utility ecosystem.
Great, thank you, Chris. Richelle?
Thanks, Kevin. I don't know if I have anything to add. The organizations that both Alan and Chris mentioned are spearheading this movement at this time. I don't think it's in, I don't have anything to add to that. I do see, however, we have our first question from the audience, which I'm going to take a stab at, but then I'm going to hand off to Alan. And that is, how hard is it to move from LTE to 5G? So as an analyst, I'm not an engineer, but my understanding is that it is largely a software-based upgrade, so that it is not swapping out every single device or every comms node in every device to make that progression. But I would like to let the engineer in the group maybe address that in more depth.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I mean, and so, yeah, the standards are really set up. So 4G to 5G is really an evolution, not a rip and replace like some of the older generations. And so even our LT core network now, there's software that's available from our vendor really to make it a 5G core as well, and support 5G in a non-standalone manner. So the radios we're putting out in the field today are capable of 5G as well. So there's a lot of opportunities from an equipment software standpoint where, you know, whether it's where you're calling it 4G or 5G, really not a big difference. I would say there are some things in the standards that we need to work on, you know, especially with the smaller channel sizes like we have. And so there are some opportunities. And this was what we were faced with when we started the LT journey. The standards weren't defined for our band. We had to work on that. Right. So it's nothing new, but there are some things that need to be done to facilitate it, but it's not anything scary, the way I'd phrase it.
Yeah, and Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's going to be a journey, right? The fact of the matter is, 5G as defined includes a whole bunch of elements of the technology, from spectrum elements to receivers and antenna elements to the integration of all of the above. And so, you know, while our consumer carriers have all announced that they have full and robust 5G, I think you take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, recognizing that there are you know, dozens of years of LTE still with us, and LTE will be the anchor for the next, you know, 1 or 2 generations, and then, you know, the 5G portions of it will be additive at that point.
That's right.
And Chris, you mentioned the word risk. It's an important one. Utilities are risk adverse, right? That's one of the key elements. No one likes to be first, although sure. Thank you, Alan, you are. But the key there is Anterix did take the risk. We really put our efforts into getting a 12.5 kilohertz channel developed into a 3x3 broadband. So the risk is minimized for the utilities perspective. The ecosystem's there. Everybody knows that LTE works. So this is really where we are today. And in my own opinion, I think the timing is right for the utilities. It seems to be the conflagration of all of these disparate systems coming together, the need to change out existing systems that are out there, end of life. And again, timing is just about perfect. So Richelle, any closing comments?
I would just say that I think this is a transformative time for utilities, and historically utilities don't like to be on the bleeding edge, but this is a case where you don't want to be a laggard either. I really think the competitive threats, of course they vary geographically, but they're real, and they're spreading rapidly. And so as I said earlier, connectivity is foundational to transformation, and I think utilities need to transform. So don't wait too long. That would be my comment.
Great. Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would approach it, you know, and we heard all the reasons why we shouldn't do private LTE, I guess. You know, you hear that that's not our core business. You know, why don't you leave it to the commercial guys? That's their core business. They're going to innovate. But I think we've touched on utilities come together. We can do the same thing. And where I go to that argument, utilities have had networks for years. We just celebrated in Southern Company 100 years of telecom. So, I mean, utilities have had their own private systems for years and years and years. We're just talking about doing something broadband, which for whatever reason seems to scare people away. But, if anything, LTE is standards-based, it's common. There's a lot less unknown about it than some proprietary system you might put in. So, so I agree. I mean, I think, hopefully we're getting past some of those arguments, but, I think from a Southern view, we're certainly willing to share and our lessons learned and hopefully, help people avoid some of the pitfalls we made. But we certainly are interested in working together and moving the industry forward in this private LTE world.
Great, thank you, Alan. And Chris, do you want to summarize?
Yeah, not really, Kevin. After Alan and Richelle, I would echo both of them. I think the time is ripe and right, and so I'm excited about the opportunity. Private LTE is a known quality. There is spectrum available for the industry to move forward. There are folks investigating different use cases. Dozens and dozens of use cases have been investigated and are being investigated. We have some early movers. We've got our crystal ball in Southern Link. We already know sort of what portions of the future look like. And so for me, I'm excited about the opportunity. And if folks have any specific questions that are Anterix related, Kevin and the team, sales and business development team, and the retuning team are available at any moment to talk and answer questions. So I think I'd stop there.
Great, thank you. And that really does conclude our discussion today on the network effect of grid communications. I'd like to take the time to thank our speakers, Richelle, Alan, Christopher, and for those of you that have joined on the phone. I'd like to ask, or also I'd like to thank UTC and Christopher specifically for hosting us. Christopher, are there any remaining questions that are out there?
So Kevin, no, we do not have any other questions that have come in at this time. But I do just want to say thank you to you all for for joining us today. Really do appreciate you all taking the time out of your schedules to attend this webinar. And as I said when we started out, if anybody would like to go back and rewatch this session, the video recording will be available on demand to everyone. And thank you once again.
Great, thank you, Christopher. Thank you. And I wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris, for closing up. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys. Once again, thank you for attending today. We look forward to seeing you all in another webinar. And as Kevin said, happy holidays, everyone, and remain safe out there.
Bye-bye.
Bye.